Now let's hear views from both sides of the aisle. We welcome Austin Barbour and Brandon Jones to our MPB studios. Austin is a Republican strategist and founder of the Clearwater Group. Brandon is an attorney and a former Democratic member of the Mississippi House. Welcome back, gentlemen.
Good to be here.
Let's start by talking about retired Representative Robert Clark. Brandon, did you cross paths? He was there for more than 30 years. Did your paths cross with him when you served in the legislature?
No, we did not serve together. I've had the privilege of being with Speaker Clark multiple times. Beautiful man personally, and of course a historic figure in Mississippi history. He was the first elected black legislator in Mississippi's history, and that didn't happen until 1967. And one of the stories that all members of that chamber are familiar with is when he was elected, he was not sure if he was going to be sworn in. He brought his attorney with him, Marion Wright, who became Marion Wright Edelman, who founded Children's Defense Fund, and they didn't know what was going to happen. His opponent in that election had filed a contest, and then they ultimately sat him in the back at a two-person seat where he sat alone and was not, of course, invited to dinners or to hang out a whole lot. But before it was done, he was elected chairman of the Ethics Committee. He was elected chairman of the Education Committee and ended up doing a pretty good term as Speaker Pro Tem. And so he stayed. He was tough. He was doing a lot of fathering during this time. Our friend Bryant Clark, who took his dad's job when his dad retired, he was raised by his dad, who was also a farmer and teacher. And despite all this hardship, despite being this historic figure, he was a stranger to no one. And if you came to him or if he came into that Capitol, he had one of the biggest smiles on his face that you could find, and just led with love. I mean, I just think of him as being not only a change maker in Mississippi history, but also a great example of how to do hard things with one of the best spirits you could ever ask for.
Yeah, I know I met him one time earlier in my career, but, of course, I'm from Yazoo City, and the Clark families, like to say, have represented some portions of Yazoo County for a long time. I was actually talking to Senator Joseph Thomas today, who is from Yazoo City, and we were talking about Representative Clark, and he told me that I guess he passed away at the age of 96. That's unbelievable, and just what a legacy, what a life he lived, and a great service to the state of Mississippi.
Yeah.
Let's move on to presumptive eligibility. Brandon, what was the holdup with something that was largely technical in nature?
I think at the end of the day, what we should say about this is that folks deserve credit. We got there, and we needed to get there. But for those who may not be familiar, when we talk about presumptive eligibility for pregnant women, what we're referring to is that Medicaid would be presumed for women who might need ambulatory care. And so it's the thing, it's a system that exists throughout almost every state in the country. In fact, I think we're one of just maybe a couple in this case that hadn't gotten there. And it was passed last year. Missy McGee out of Forest County deserves a ton of credit for this. She's the House Medicaid chair, and it's her bill. Now, they passed it last year. And over in the Senate, Chairman Blackwell, Vice Chair Nicole Boyd, they passed it too. There was a technical problem with the bill, and so the feds sent it back to the state. And so this was important because in order for Mississippi pregnant women to avail themselves of this coverage, we had to fix it. And so the House, I think it was, Austin, one of the first things they did over there. Chairman McGee got it out. It came to the Senate. There was some concern that because it had been joined with some other issues, that Chairman Blackwell might be frustrated about the process. But to his credit, to Vice Chair Boyd's credit, they found their way through that. They passed it out. And so it looks like, Wilson, we're on the way to fixing that part of the program, which I know is very important to thousands of people who care about pregnant women in Mississippi.
Yeah, and as a fiscal conservative, I deem that this is important because ultimately, if if a woman who's on Medicaid, who's having a baby, is not taking care of that unborn baby, or then once the baby is born, the baby is not getting taken care of, or the woman is not getting taken care of, ultimately they're going to need treatment, they're going to need help, they may need hospital stays, which the taxpayer is going to pay. So I can look at this as this is good for a pregnant woman. This is good for that unborn baby. When we deal, and there's been a lot of debate over postpartum depression medications and ensuring that women that are on Medicaid or women that are on private insurance, that they're getting what doctors want them to get in terms of postpartum depression. This is good. This is good from helping these folks, but it's also good ultimately for the taxpayers too. And I don't want to look at things as dollars and cents, because I can argue this on both sides. Okay, from just a human capacity, we can say it's a good thing, but it's also good that we are that Medicaid has the ability to take care of running that agency as best. And I hope that's fair the way that I describe that, because you can argue it that it's good for both sides.
You know, I think so oftentimes that's one of the reasons that this Medicaid expansion debate has really troubled me, is that, Austin, I think with so many of these issues, not only is there a good ethical, moral, health basis for them, there's also a good economic basis for it. I mean, because you end up paying for this stuff one way or the other. And for these women, this is a difficult time. We already know some of the challenges our state faces with having safe births, having healthy people go through the birthing process. And so it's just an absolute good thing to do. I'm pleased with both House and Senate leadership for helping get this thing done. And
I'm sorry. It's Senators Blackwell and Boyd and this obviously on the Senate side and Chairman McGee. They may not always agree on every little definition of these bills, but ultimately they do a pretty good job of getting together and trying to work on doing what they think is best.
Austin, the mobile sports betting bill that would legalize mobile sports betting in Mississippi, the bill died, but now the language is back, inserted into other bills. It's an interesting way to bring this back out for discussion. Yeah,
I laughed. I saw my friend Casey Ure, who's the chairman of the gaming committee in the House. Marshall Ramsey drew him in a cartoon, and I texted and said, "You're big time now." And this is a bill that this is an issue that Casey and the House, the Speaker, have made a priority for multiple years now. This year they fought even harder on it. The Senate's got some of the Senate have a different position on this, but the House wants to continue this conversation, this debate, in every chance that they possibly can. And as you just said, there were 2 Senate bills that got amended to add mobile sports language back into those. Those are headed to the Senate. We'll see what the Senate ultimately does. They either have to concur or invite conference, or they could let them die on the calendar. That deadline is Wednesday. I hope they'll go to conference. I hope that conversation, look, just as an individual, as a human being, I like the opportunity for me to make a decision whether I want to use my cell phone or whether I want to bet on Ole Miss to win the national championship or to not. Depends on the year. I probably lost money in 2024.
You can just bet me that right now.
I can, or the Broncos. So I like the opportunity as an individual. Let me make that decision. Yes, I know there are pitfalls, but I know what those pitfalls are, what those ups and downs. So we'll see where this ultimately goes. I think it's probably less likely than more likely that this thing gets worked out, but you can't fault the House for trying every way that they possibly can, and that's what they're doing to pass what they have said is a priority for them all year.
Brandon?
Well, I would point out Senator David Blunt, chairman of gaming in the Senate, that was also his first Marshall Ramsey cartoon, the one you mentioned. So our MPB colleague, Marshall Ramsey, we need him to personalize a couple of those. Look, I'll say this.
I didn't know that was David's first.
It was, and I'll say this to Marshall. I'll take this up with him privately. David has hardly ever looked that mean. I mean, come on, he's one of the nicest guys over there. We all notice people driving around listening to this program, and people who live in Mississippi have probably noticed they've gotten some mail from the mobile gaming people. There's been some billboards up. I mean, this is a rich industry that has a lot of money to spend on this. I think if I was trying to channel Chairman Blunt and just kind of round out the conversation, he has concerns about the impact this would have on brick and mortar Mississippi casinos and jobs. That's part of the concern. And then there is a concern, you kind of referenced it a moment ago, Austin. it doesn't want young people walking around with casinos in their pockets, and they're concerned with that. You know, we've heard very smart people.
Yeah, I understand.
We've heard very smart people say that sports betting can become the next opioid crisis in this country. That it is having pretty ruinous effect on young people. It's added to the list of things that we can be concerned about when their head in the phone. So I think there is both a concern about what it might do to existing industry in Mississippi, which I know has been kind of at the center of the debate, but also concern about what is this doing to the minds of folks, to the young folks that might get access to and get hooked on it, and then are we going to be having to come back and deal with that in future
And
generations?
I respect and appreciate, and I've had this conversation with David before, and he believes that, and I get it, and I respect him. I really do. But as I've said, and I say to you and to him and to anybody else, listen, I can go bet right now on my phone. It's illegally. It's through a Canadian website, a website in the Caribbean. They pay no taxes here. There's no guarantee I will actually get money. So you can do it. My 19-year-old, 25-year-olds, they can do it now. It's just about, do we want to try to legalize this process in a way that will protect the brick and mortar casino industry, which we must. They've put billions of dollars of investment in the state and have tens of thousands of employees. So I just think if we can continue having the conversation and debate on this issue for the rest of the session, that's a good thing versus, killing it by Wednesday.
Let's move on to tax reform legislation. No love lost between the House and Senate Republicans on this issue. Austin, do you know if they're even talking at this point?
I think that they are talking. I mean, you hear lots of rumors or have conversations here or there. I'm pretty confident that they are talking. That leadership is talking. That the governor is involved and they're having conversations there too. The speaker, the lieutenant governor, the governor. Obviously, we've got the primary chairman for these issues will be Josh Harkins in the Senate and Trey Lamar in the House. I mean, all of these individuals are of like mind that they want to do something on tax reform. They have been having conversations for months and months on this. I think I can say with total confidence, this is not broken down to where they're not talking. Okay, will a deal get done? I don't know. I'm not sitting in the room, but I do have full confidence that they're having conversations, serious conversations, ideas on the table about how do we get this across the goal line? Tax reform, and as I said last week, a way to fully fund, better fund. I only use better fund instead of fully fund infrastructure, and making sure that MDOT has the money that they need for the 33,000 plus miles of roads, highways, and bridges that they have to maintain in Mississippi.
The problem with these negotiations not being made more public, or with the public not knowing more about the process, is that folks like me and you just end up saying the same things to each other. I mean, this is an invented crisis. We do not need tax reform. No one is calling their legislator asking for this. This is a politician's way of making a name for themselves in the middle of what is a very dicey economic moment. Has anybody read the paper today? Anybody listening to me taking a look at the Wall Street Journal? Our economy's in a bit of a tailspin right now. I don't know that this is the time for one of the poorest states in the United States to cut 1/3 of its budget on a hope and a prayer. So I actually hope they're not meeting. I hope they're not talking. I hope that it doesn't go anywhere, because if it does go somewhere, we will be right back in this room, or the future versions of Austin and Brandon will be here.
Does that exist?
Trying to undo this mess. And trying to figure out, well, how do we backwalk this, that we've put ourselves into this position? It affects so many aspects of Mississippi life. It's going to cause county and municipal officials to raise taxes at the local level. It's just going to be a tax shift. And then for our elderly folks and folks who are poorer, which we have a lot of them, believe it or not, it's going to raise their taxes. And so I wish they would hang this one up. Nobody's asking for it. There's no crisis. It's an answer to a question that hasn't been asked.
I'd love to pay less taxes. I understand where you're coming from. There are responsibilities that the government has to handle, and we'll go through the list, from healthcare to roads and bridges to infrastructure to education. Absolutely, there are core responsibilities that government must fund, must handle, must take care of. But I'd absolutely love to pay less taxes, and I appreciate their conversation of going through this. I trust them that they'll get to the right place, and it may be what you're saying, that they don't come up with a solution this year because they can't all get on the same page. But I'm darn happy that they're debating.
If they don't, this is one of the governor's pet issues. Do you think he would call a special session to make it happen if they don't come into an agreement during the regular session?
I think there was a time early in the year when we were all kind of in a wait-and-see approach, both about this legislative session and just things more broadly. And I think that possibility was batted around, Wilson. I think we heard people talk about it. I'm assuming that Governor Reeves is reading the same stuff we're all reading and is this – I would just ask that. I would ask that in all sincerity. Is this a moment in American history as we sit here in this month that you want to poke the bear and play roulette with your tax scheme? This same legislature has talked about bills that are titled this year, Critical Teacher Shortage Bill. You got members of the Senate that are breaking their neck because we can't afford to pay a cost of living increase that was passed in the 90s for state employees that we have used to get people to come work for the state for years and years and years. So when we talk about these essential functions that you and I were just talking about, I'm not talking about new uniforms for the football team. We're talking about critical teacher shortages, getting people to come out of retirement and teach in schools. We're talking about being able to afford and make good on the promise you made to public employees, because we need those public employees to do all the things they do, firefighters, police officers, teachers. So to me, I just asked that. This is a question I've had. You and I have had this conversation with people who are pushing this bill. The thing I just keep coming back to them with, if you're saying that on the one hand, if we can't afford these essential programs on the one hand, and then on the other hand, you beat me over the head with let's take a third of our budget out of play. I just don't get it. I mean, I am not a great math student, but that don't make any sense. It doesn't add up. So I don't know. I wish they would drop it.
I mean, I think you're asking the question, would the governor call a special session? I mean, he has said over and over that we need to eliminate the income tax at the state level.
Yep.
He has 3 sessions left. The one that we're in right now, 26 and 27. It is obviously a priority to him. I don't, there's no private conversations that you have to have with Tate Reeves to know this is a priority to him. If you made me, if I could bet on my mobile phone, I would bet yes. I think Tate Reeves would do that. But we'll see.
And Austin, this isn't a shot against him, but he has less stroke as the years go on. That's what we call a lame duck. I mean,
right.
he can't run again.
But we'll just see. I mean, I hope it doesn't get to that. I hope something happens with negotiations that are going on.
On the issue of redistricting, the House and the Senate have now adopted each other's plans. Brandon, do you think the process, particularly in the Senate, was fair and transparent?
No. Thanks for asking it that way. So a federal panel, just for listeners to make sure they're caught up, last summer a federal panel said that Mississippi's and the House's Senate map violated the Voting Rights Act by diluting the voting strength of black voters in DeSoto County and Hattiesburg. So we had 8 months. And, here in the last few days, these plans have been made public. Now, if a federal court tells you that you failed to properly consider these things, and then you basically go into hiding for 8 months, I think that's a problem. They did not make it available to view online, which is typically done, has historically been done. They didn't allow for some early review. And to my knowledge, had no public conversations with the people in these affected areas. These people had been singled out as areas where their Senate map drawers had not done it right. They had 8 months. Have a public hearing. Maybe you won't like what they have to say, but at least then you've given people an opportunity to explain what makes their area unique, what lines need to be considered, what are areas of discrete and common interest. It didn't happen. And I think these are simple things that it didn't have to be that way. Listen to the black community that was pointed out by the federal court. Instead of having a couple of balding white guys get up there 8 months later and read out their plan and clearly hadn't talked to anybody, including people in their own chamber. I mean, I think it's fair to say to this bunch, that would not pass in the private sector. doing your job in this way. There's no other job in the world where you can have 8 months to do a project. You don't talk to the people affected, and you don't even go down the hall and talk to your colleague about it. And so here we are. I think they could have trouble, Wilson, when it goes back to the court, who's going to have to again take a look at this and review it for exactly the reasons I just said.
You know, Brandon is a lawyer who deals with a lot of election law. I am not a lawyer, but I know about redistricting. I mean, I've known about redistricting for 30 years, and so have you. It's always how this process works. Is that good or bad? I don't know, but I mean, redistricting is so difficult. Whether you're talking about judicial redistricting, which they're debating, you're talking about political redistricting, it is very difficult. You know why? Because it impacts incumbents, okay? Yeah. Or on judicial redistricting, it impacts, counties and cities. Are we going to break up Forest and Lamar County, who've been in the same chancery district forever? Well, that's going to be a problem, but we may have to put this puzzle together. It is hard. Dean Kirby has been working has been working on this redistricting for months and months and months and months. Was he having open forums? I don't know. Was he talking to people in DeSoto County or Hattiesburg? I don't know. I mean, there ain't a nicer person than Dean Kirby at the Capitol. I promise you, he was talking to people, having conversations. He was the lead on this in the Senate. When I look specifically at the DeSoto County districts, they were mandated that they had to create a new minority-majority district, which had a higher percentage of black voting age population than white voting age population. That was essentially in Horn Lake. Had Horn Lake in it. You correct me if I'm wrong here. That was a requirement from the judge. They created that district. Okay, that meant that the other districts in DeSoto County, there were 3 other Senate districts, were going to get moved around.
You can't draw one without influencing the others.
So I think they did what the judge asked them to do there. And in Hattiesburg, they created these 2 new districts. So I would say that they did what they were told to do by the judge. Now, maybe the judge, or what Brandon's saying, is going to look at it and go, I don't like what you did. You didn't do it as well as I would have liked.
It's a few judges, and they'll have to, they'll have to reassess it.
I'm saying one judge.
Yeah, they'll have to reassess it. Yeah.
So I guess my point is that I think the requirements that were put on the legislature by this judicial panel, federal judicial panel, or judges or whatever, said you got to address Horn Lake and Hattiesburg. They addressed them. They did what they said. I guess they could say, well, we don't like it as much as we prefer. Or they may go, hey, you did it. Let's move forward. But I have to leave it to lawyers like Brandon to understand that.
A complex puzzle with a lot at stake, and we'll see what happens. I'm only halfway through my list of topics here, but we're out of time. I'm afraid.
Can I mention one more? This is so interesting. It is the uncork the sip debate that's been going on for more than 10 years, to where the legislature is now going to allow direct shipment of wines from all across the country. Walter Michelle and Hank Zuber, Brent Powell, Jeremy England, these folks who have worked on this issue for more than a decade now as a consumer. I don't really drink wine, but as a consumer, if you want a special wine from California or wherever that you couldn't get in your liquor store, it's now legal. And that's by the governor.
And that's the key, right? That it won't be any wine. If you can go buy it locally, you still must do it that way.
That if your liquor store can't, doesn't have a deal with that winery to be able to get it in, now you'll be able to do it. I love this.
I got Nucky Thompson over here. He wants to be able to gamble on demand, and he wants alcohol delivered to his door.
I don't even drink wine, but whatever. I think it's great. Congrats to those who are involved with this.
And clearly Mississippi has changed over the years.
Yes.
Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you both once again. This has been At Issue, a weekly discussion about the 2025 Mississippi legislative session. You can hear At Issue every Friday night at 6:30 during the session on MPB Think Radio. You can also subscribe to our At Issue podcast, which features extended versions of our roundtable discussions and featured interviews. And if you'd really like to see what we all look like, catch the video versions of our roundtable and interviews at mpbonline.org and on YouTube. At Issue is a production of Mississippi Public Broadcasting. I'm Wilson Stribling. From all of us here at MPB, we thank you for joining us.